Hi guys, so nice to see you all. We're going to talk about the contemporary Seadweller range today. Um, and of course, the Watches and Wonders has started. It's actually about to close by now. So we'll have to start by addressing the elephant in the room, which is, of course, the new releases. Especially in the deep sea segment of the Seadweller range, and what kind of updates we are facing here. I'm of course going to talk a little bit about the origins of the Seadweller and how the current lineup speaks to that and how it differs from that. And then maybe we'll have a more wide-ranging discussion if anyone else is interested to jump in. I set aside some time for an hour, so we'll have some time to have a collective discussion if anyone is interested in contributing from the chat or jumping on the panel. Super Pitchy, welcome. Lance, Thruster, welcome to the channel. It's so nice to see you all. I'm wearing today my Polar Explorer. And since OC was giving me a hard time in one of these earlier live streams and asking me if I would wear a pink hoodie, here I am. As long as Uncle Ralph provides, we'll most certainly wear it. That being said, let's jump in. So there are a few changes that Rolex introduced under Deep Sea new model for 2022. At least at first blush, they seem to be very cosmetic changes, the kind of incremental and evolutionary modifications that Rolex introduces to their lineup and to their specific models year by year. In the case of the Deep Sea, and so far the most reliable information we have is in the form of this very short piece from Hodinkee, written by one Danny Milton, tells us that the bezel has been ever so slightly made thinner, right? It's a little thinner because they wanted to accommodate a chamfered version of the sapphire crystal. They have also made a few updates to increase visibility. I can only assume the chromolite is supposed to have been enhanced, and the date window enlarged along, of course, with the date itself. So we have a few changes that enhanced the appearance of the dial on the watch, which seems to be pertinent, which seems to be important to an actual diver's watch, kind of the peak of this genre as it's represented in the contemporary Rolex lineup. Of course, I've likened this in the past to owning a hunting dog in a big city. At the end of the day, we all know that people who actually use these watches for diving, even as part of a certain ethos and not necessarily for utility, are quite small. But there was still some sort of disappointing news, you know, and it's almost like a throwaway. I'm not sure if it's been confirmed by Rolex yet, but these people have been reporting from Watches and Wonders from Geneva, so there's no reason not to trust them. And they claim that the flip lock dive extension on the bracelet has been removed. right? Which also obviously gives you a little more wiggle room if you're actually planning to fit this over a wetsuit. And the claim is that this is also the case throughout the Seadweller range, and especially the steel one as it is specified here. Now, I went to a local Rolex AD with whom I have a relationship, not a purchase relationship, mind you, since I very rarely get interested in buying a contemporary Rolex. But I do have a very friendly relationship with them, an ongoing conversation with them, talking about Rolex, talking about watches. And they told me that they haven't yet received training for the new models, and that they have not received such information themselves. And even though they couldn't really contradict the claims about the deep sea, since it has that new model announcement, uh, they highly doubted that the removal of the diver's extension applied to the Sea Dweller, but it remains to be seen, right? We don't really know if that's the case or not yet. But for the deep sea, I think it's pretty reliable. Reporting from the ground, these people at Hodinki probably know what they are talking about. Full on John, welcome. Chili Badger, welcome. Yes, Lance, this is the claim. Again, to put it in terms of the intelligence service agencies, we can neither confirm nor deny at this point. So what we have so far in terms of the new introductions, in terms of the updates to the Seadweller lineup, they seem to be mostly cosmetic. They seem to play a little bit with the proportions of the deep sea, both the black dial and the so-called James Cameron. And as it happens, I'm sure as they change from one model to another, one iteration to another of the same model, I'm pretty sure that the shade of the color, shade of the blue on the dial will also change slightly. Rolex likes playing around with these things, introducing like minor modifications so that you can actually differentiate one generation from another. So that's as much for the modern, but for the new introductions from Watches and Wonders in 2022. Now to return to the origins of the Seadweller and why it was reintroduced in the 50th anniversary in a certain way. If you're interested in vintage watches, and if you're interested especially in vintage Submariners and Seadwellers, oftentimes the holy grail when it comes to the Seadweller is what people call the double red, right? Or sometimes they abbreviated it to DRSD, the double red Seadweller, which is the 4-digit 1665. Here you can see it lining up right next to a contemporary Submariner, a red Submariner, 1680. And you can see that even though it has the same case diameter, it has a certain heft, certain presence to it, from the thickness of the case, of course, from that introduction of the helium escape valve. And this model, of course, remains, again, very desirable for many collectors, and the prices have been creeping up ever since I've first taken a look at one. I think when I first saw these, they were already 3-4 times as much as any Submariner that I was looking at the time, or the value of my Submariner as it was assessed. So it was for me, it was always that watch that I sought after and couldn't quite get, and now it seems to be slightly out of reach in terms of the amount of money that I would want to put in a single watch, but still very desirable to me. But of course, if you are really invested in these models, Mr. Skydweller is here, welcome. If you're really invested in these models, you would know that the very first prototypes of these Seadwellers were actually introduced with a single line of red writing. Right, and you see here, let's get closer a little bit. You have, with the help of the helium escape valve, a depth rating that amounts to 2,000 feet, equaling 610 meters, right? This is the double red as it stands right next to the red writing Submariner 1680. And as you might guess, these two models went through more or less concurrent transformations, just as the four-digit Submariner with date lost its red writing around, I think, I want to say 1978. So did the Seadweller, and then you have all these different marks and different iterations that are called Great White and so on and so forth with all white writing. They're also very beautiful and very desirable. Don't take me wrong. I think I would honestly, in terms of vintage Seadwellers, I think one would be quite happy with a beautiful tritium all white Seadweller as well. And of course, you know what really distinguished these models at a certain point in time were these super domed acrylic crystals that gave them almost this mini spacecraft look, right? And it was like strapping a little UFO on your wrist. And of course, that went well with the thickness of the case as well. And you see nowadays people using these sorts of vintage sourced OEM tropic domed crystals for all sorts of other watches. They're very popular for vintage Submariners, but I've also seen them on vintage GMT Masters and other watches as well. And there are some companies that produce those according to vintage specifications, and have really come up with great examples, actually, without claiming that they're authentic, without trying to trick you into something. The brand's name is called True Dome. I would very much recommend it, because finding an actual tropic domed crystal has become incredibly difficult, whether you're looking for T19 or the less domed T39. Forget it. It's either impossible to find or very expensive, or you will end up paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars and getting something that is actually simply a reproduction or a replica, and you would have a very hard time to distinguish it unless you're a real expert. So, all right, that digression aside, we were talking about the very, very original Seadwellers, right? You know, the ones from 1967, of which the 50th anniversary version is supposed to be a reiteration, right? And there we have the single red, actually even more rare and even more desirable than the double reds. And there you have it. You see just a single line of red writing, not the Submariner part, now only the Seadweller, and you see that this is an earlier, um, almost like a prototypical model, which has the meters first and a 500-meter rating rather than 610, and 1650 feet rating rather than 2000, right? And on the case back, I think there should be a picture of the case back here. Perhaps not. But on the case back, these single reds have the engraving for patent pending, whereas the double reds already have, pardon me, the Rolex patent. So that's why some people were caught off guard on the 50th anniversary. Some were expecting that Rolex would pay tribute with a double red anniversary model, but they actually went with what they considered to be a more authentic representation of the model's origins, which was a single line of red writing that said Seadweller, and then introduced the depth ratings, which I think is actually a very nice touch, especially because these single reds are probably out of reach, except for a super collector at this point. But beautiful watches, and really a great representation, especially from the 60s, from the late 60s, of that true diverse heritage of the brand and of the Submariner Seadweller lineup. So here we finally come to the contemporary lineup of Seadwellers. And of course, you know, there's no mistaking that they share, especially in terms of their origins, the same provenance as the Submariners. But there has been a tendency in Rolex increasingly to really, not hermetically, but quite intentionally separate every sports watch line from the next. So obviously you won't see any mention of Submariner when the reference is to the Seadweller line, even though, of course, they share the same heritage. And the four main models we have here are, of course, the Seadweller with red writing. By now, I guess, possibly Mark III, you might say, of that 50th anniversary model that came out in 2017. You have the two-tone steel Rolex model Seadweller with the matching gold writing that goes along with all the gold accents, including, of course, the polished center links of the bracelet. You have the 44 millimeter Rolex Deep Sea Seadweller with the black dial, kind of a more severe and minimalist aesthetic, and one of the biggest watches, of course, that Rolex produces, along with the Yachtmaster 2. And then we have the highly desirable Deep Sea Seadweller James Cameron with that gradient blue and black dial that has the really the story of that James Cameron dive that is almost inscribed, almost reproduced on the dial of the watch, right? You know, that as if you are taking that plunge into the sea, and as you go deeper, of course, it becomes darker and darker, right? From this deep shade of blue into almost pitch black, and deep sea is written in that moss green shade. Again, except for the dimensions of this watch and the fact that it looks out of all proportion on me, I have a very deep affection for this watch, and I really do love it when Mike the Snake brings it out. Um, I'm kind of surprised actually that he doesn't wear it much more often. Perhaps that is another problem that we can talk about, right? You know, not necessarily relating to one person or another, but how these recent changes in the market have somehow spoiled the experience for those of us who might even own some of these more desirable models, right? To the point that they become too precious to even wear. Right, so let's move to the heart of the lineup and talk a little bit about the slightly controversial changes. And that's the reason actually that I started with the vintage models, because at the end of the day, of course, there are a few cosmetic elements, and of course the very dimensions of the watch that very much distinguish it from a vintage Seadweller, right? For the longest time, Seadwellers were actually the same dimensions in terms of the case diameter with the Submariner. They were just thicker, so they had a certain kind of presence on the wrist. But when they came up with this anniversary model, it seems that they spent quite a bit of time in figuring out the dimensions and proportions of this watch in distinction with the Submariner, in contradistinction to the Submariner. So it's not only that they, over time, removed the Submariner writing from the dial, but Rolex gradually aspired to give the Seadweller, the model and the lineup, its own character within that entire professional line. And this, I think, along with the deep sea, which is, of course, unmistakable to a Submariner, is the epitome of that ideology of progressive design and gradual improvement, evolution over revolution. So we have a 43 millimeter case with a 22 millimeter lug width. So not only do we have a watch that sits rather differently from a Submariner on the wrist, we also have a watch that has, in my humble opinion, perhaps the most ideal proportions in the contemporary lineup of Rolex, in the way, again, that the case sits against the bracelet, in the way that the bracelet tapers, in the way that the dial is proportioned vis-a-vis the rest of the watch, in the way that the hands are proportioned in relation to the dial. Everything seems just perfect. As I said, the red writing on the dial harkens back to those first single red Seadwellers that were produced in the year of 1967, still patent pending on the case back. Everything seems great. So far, so good, right? Even for the purist who is perhaps simply looking for a reproduction. And then we came down to this particular element, which always seems very controversial, the Cyclops. The Cyclops. And people had this expectation that I would, as someone who likes a 4-digit no-date Submariner, that I had a certain aversion to even the date indicator, and most certainly to Cyclops. I think actually it's a beautiful, beautiful design element, right? Especially on a diver's watch. What could be better, right? Those of you who actually wear your watches to water probably had at some point a certain water drop traveling over your crystal. And if you caught it at the right moment, at the right angle, you basically experienced its natural magnification capabilities. That's what the Cyclops is, right? That's what the Cyclops is trying to replicate. Uh, and it's a very utilitarian enhancement. And in a way, for any Rolex watch that has a date indicator, it has become part and parcel of the design. And the reason that it wasn't introduced for Seadwellers had something to do with that domed acrylic crystal, right? Which was, again, part of that utilitarian design. And it was built especially so it sits just right and seals as tight as possible so it doesn't pop under conditions of extreme pressure. And those of you, again, who know a little bit more about the Cyclops know that it can be easily taken off your crystal, right? With the help of very simple tools and in less than 15 seconds, let's put it this way. So for the actual use of that watch, for the actual build of that watch when the Seadweller first came out to tackle these immense depths as a diver's watch, it needed that particular kind of crystal. And it was, one, not entirely possible to sit a Cyclops at the right angle on that super dome crystal. And two, even if that were possible, it would have popped out under extreme depths. So it was almost completely useless. Now that we have modern Seadwellers, now that we have sapphire crystals on them that are much more flat, I don't exactly see the problem with introducing a Cyclops. If you have a date function on your watch, if your watch shows the date, you might as well be able to see it. It might as well be visible, right? So why not the Cyclops? I do respect the purists who say that a Cyclops doesn't belong to a Seadweller. For them, there's always the deep sea, right? That still doesn't have the Cyclops. But the modern Seadweller is just a beautiful sports watch that has a very distinct utilitarian heritage, but that grew out of that heritage to become really a luxury item, right? As is the case with the entire lineup of Rolex watches today. So it is what it is. I'm completely on board with both the dimensions, both the new dimensions of the case, and the introduction of the Cyclops. And the second controversy was, of course, triggered, to use the right term, when the two-tone steel gold, steel Rolex Or model was introduced in 2019. Right? I want to welcome also the new people. Hey, 150, I love you, man. Thanks for dropping by. Yes, 150, exactly right. If you really want a Rolly with diamonds, you get ones that they provide you, right? You get ones that have the factory diamond dials. You get ones that are somehow decorated on the bezel or on the lugs. And you know, that's the thing. Rolex actually has some of the greatest selection of diamonds and precious stones at their that is available anywhere. So right, that's not the way I would go about it, because first of all, to me, it messes with the authenticity of that particular watch. And yes, if you were forced to sell it, or if you had to sell it, or if you just wanted to get rid of it for whatever reason, unless you find the right buyer, you will lose your shirt over it. You will lose a lot of money on it. Even if you find the right buyer, you would still lose some money over it. Midtown Chuckster, hello, nice to see you. Um, what's the point of having a watch capable of withstanding 600-meter pressure when humans are not capable of anywhere near this? Right. So you are not actually diving with the watch on you with a snorkel or something into 600 meters. You are actually in a submersible, of course, when you are tackling those sorts of depths. But I think the answer is actually much more simple. And I will return to that analogy of a hunting dog, right? What's the point of having an English setter or an Irish setter or a Cocker Spaniel or a pointer as a pet in a city? There is no point, right? Are you going to hunt ducks or go after a certain kind of game anytime soon? Not really, right? But it's the story, it's the appeal, it's the aspiration that's wrapped in that particular being, and in this case, in that particular item, that gives you a certain kind of pleasure, that gives you a certain kind of enjoyment, that introduces just another layer or dimension of experience into your everyday life, which might otherwise be quite humdrum, right? It's a conversation piece on your wrist. It's an engineering marvel on your wrist. And same here with this two-tone watch, right? You might say, well, wasn't the Seadweller line about utility? Wasn't it about these entire range of engineering marvels which withstand these inhuman, superhuman, overhuman degrees of pressure and depth? Because now we have them rated for 4,000 feet, right? 20 meters. But at the end of the day, again, you have a watch with a certain heritage and a sporty, dynamic provenance that is updated and given new life as a luxury item. So I quite like this one as well, and I like the fact that it is distinguished from a two-tone Submariner, what they call the Bumblebee, right? Black and gold rather than blue and gold, as in a bluesy. You have also the matching gold writing that sets it apart. Of course, the dimensions of the case, the watch, the thickness, everything else separates it as well, the bracelet. But hey, I find this to be a very special watch. And if it was offered to me at retail, I think I would jump at the opportunity of owning it as well. And I know it was, again, very controversial. Why have a two-tone sports watch? Well, what? Why was there a gold, two-tone or gold Submariner in the first place? Right? Whether you're diving with snorkels or if you're scuba diving, I've never really heard even stories of people diving with their gold subs, because that's not really what they're made for, right? They're made to be worn. They're made to be. They're meant to invoke those stories. They're meant to somehow harken back to this sporting heritage, harken back to this idea of human achievement against all odds. But at the end of the day, they're just worn by guys who can actually access them and afford them, and not necessarily the athletes and the divers and other exceptional people for whom they were initially designed for, right? Mercedes Gleitze crossed the channel swimming with a Rolex around her neck on a necklace, um, which gave this immense prestige to the oyster case, as it was designed to be waterproof and dustproof and sealed tight in the most perfect way possible. How many of us cross the channel or straight with a Rolex on our wrist or hanging down our necks? When will it happen next? It won't. But that excitement of the story, the force of that narrative, adds to the mystique of the watch, um, supplements the story of a particular model or range to the point that even when you are not aware of it, you are somehow caught in the mystique of those stories that have accumulated over the years. Chili Badger says, I love this particular Rolex. Red line is still available in 2 generations for what I consider a great price, overlooked. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not saying it's a model that you can get just by walking into a Rolex authorized dealer. But certainly anything in the Seadweller range is much more realistic of an acquisition for someone who doesn't have a purchase history than a Submariner, than a GMT Master, and certainly than a Daytona. Bobby Legs, nice to see you here. Eric Al, oh, Taking Time is here. Taking Time at work, but I had to stop by and give an upvote to the Lord. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much for stopping by. And guys, if you have enjoyed this content, please don't forget to upvote. If you have not yet subscribed, please do so. This is the very last day when I'm offering help for absolutely free. So if you have any last minute questions, if you want me to do a collection review for you, especially in a live stream that involves you, please send an email to lordhellespont5@gmail.com. That's lordhellespont@gmail.com. And I'll get back to you immediately, and we'll make something happen. After today, I will probably start asking for nominal contributions to make specialized videos, to which I dedicate a lot of time, by the way. And again, at this point in time, as I try to work my way to monetization, I mostly do it to give back to the community, to Archiverse that has given me so much. At the end of the day, that's what I'm here for. Ian, I hope you are well. I hope you are well too, my friend. Love you. Love your presence. OC, ST43 was my first Rolex, had my first appointment with an AD, and walked out with it. A few years ago, I'm assuming, I remember OC saying he bought his first Rolex from an AD at 2019. So that's entirely possible. It's a little more difficult now, but of all watches that you can get, I think the two-tone Seadweller might be the actual sleeper. Yes, it's 17K, right, in US dollars. That's not necessarily what everyone has for their watch budget, but it is one that you can actually get pretty realistically. You might even be able to walk out with it at the right moment, and you will wait much less for it, because for whatever reason, again, it has this bad rep. And when it's discontinued, you'll be the one who is laughing. And yes, the Seadweller with red writing, it's also at least it's not impossible. Eric L says, considering WR ratings are in still waters, 600 meter WR water resistance is probably more like 200 meter in normal moving water where our bodies are moving. I have a 600 meter diver, but have decompression problems beyond 12 feet. LOL. Yes, that's true. Now I'm gonna post the link. I have about 20 more minutes. If any of you want to ask any more questions from the chat, or jump on the panel, you're more than welcome. I just wanted to take my lunch break, basically, my midday break, and spend it with you guys rather than just being miserable on my own. So it's been a great pleasure. Again, if you have any questions later, something that pops to your mind, especially before we hit the month of April, just send an email to lordhellespontv@gmail.com. If you're feeling generous, if you have been enjoying my content and you want to encourage me on the path to monetization, and help me get some gear when I can actually go out and about and film in Los Angeles, send a PayPal donation to lordhellespontv@gmail.com. Otherwise, I'm quite happy that you're here. I'm quite happy that you're listening and contributing on the chat, on the panel. And I really appreciate your support in the form of upvotes and likes and subscriptions. So I'm always here for your questions, for your requests, and I'll continue to be on other panels as well. So there's the link. And in either case, I'm here for another 3-4 minutes, and then I'm back to making my cup of coffee and getting back to the daily humdrum of my work. Yes, so most of you know I am quite enamored by the Seadweller line, especially with the steel model, with the single line of red writing on it. Again, it's one of the sleepers in the line, if you ask me. If you ask me again, it's the best proportioned model on that entire line of sports watches in Rolex, priced on the list right under $13,000. And it's not impossible to get. And when it comes to the two-tone Seadweller, which is another model that I really appreciate because it's basically the same watch, but executed in oyster steel and yellow gold, I would love to have that too. And that's quite a bargain as well, even though it is not as desirable in the secondary market as many other Rolex sports watches, right, at this moment. But trust me, things are going to change if it gets discontinued sometime soon. But in the secondary market, I think they rate pretty much at the same level, the Seadweller 43 with red writing and the Seadweller 43 two-tone. 49 is fine. We have just more or less finished the live stream, but I'm so happy to see you. Yes, 49 is fine. I need to visit your ADOC. Yes, he's very, 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 very important person, Mr. 432. But hey, it matters. It does matter how you comport yourself in a certain situation, what you ask for, if you know exactly what you want to get. All these things put you ahead of the line for sure. Because at the end of the day, I don't think there are any real wait lists when it comes to most authorized dealers. Right? At the end of the day, watches come in and they allocate them to their preferred customers. And sometimes those preferred customers might be making their very first purchase, right? And may have arrived through other connections as well, right? Maybe they were referred by someone whom this dealer trusts and has had a working relationship for decades. There you go. No such thing as a wait list. Lens thruster, the dial on the 43 looks black in some lights and gray in others. Love it. Yes, I think that especially with the so-called Mark II, right? You know, that's something I didn't mention right before I close. I should say that the very first iteration of this model that came out on the 50th anniversary actually doesn't have this coronet right in the middle of the phrase Swiss made. So the dials on these two watches, again, are slightly different from each other. And I think what Lance describes is the case from Mark II onwards. And I'm saying this more or less in a speculative way because I didn't actually handle a model from exactly 2017 yet, one without the coronet. So I haven't in person seen the difference between these dials, but the dial from Mark II onwards, when that coronet was introduced, certainly gives you that experience that Lance Thruster describes, that it has this, you know, a little bit of a matted out black effect going on. 495 says, I made my first Rolex purchase after about 5-6 months of visiting the AD, but they said only one steel watch per customer per year now. Yeah, I think these things constantly change. I don't know if they're consistent policies or if they're what they simply say because they want to allocate those watches to someone else. I don't know. Maybe I have trust issues, guys. It's quite all right, right? You want to believe in what your authorized dealer or what your gray market seller tells you. Be my guest. I hardly believe anyone with whom I simply have a transactional relationship, right? If they're family, if they're friends, that's a different thing altogether. But a person who sells me watches, I know a little better. As soon as you mention or ask to be put on a wait list, you are viewed as a loser in the sales associate's eyes. The original Aussie is, as always, speaking his truth, but in a very, very harsh tone. It's okay. We have room for elitists in our community as well. Although I always had a problem with the word loser, but that's another story altogether. I've had two, both never gave me a second Rolex, two authorized dealers, but it's been only 2 years in total. Chuckster, thank you, Lord HV, for your explanation, which included an enlightening analogy. Thank you for your kind words. It's just something that came to my mind yesterday, but it's fantastic way of looking at those elements in our life that have perhaps outlived their use, but that still have a certain charm, certain mystique, that still have something to give us in terms of enjoyment and experience. Jay, I leave that to you to discover if you could mistake that for an Apple Watch strap. You're either trying to pull my leg, or yeah, it's not that difficult. At the end of the day, if you do want to buy an Hermes watch strap, they have a lot in stock, right? You can just walk in, find your sales associate if you have one, or wait in those lines and be patient enough, set aside at least an hour of your time. Half of it you end up waiting in line, half of it you spend inside the store. You take your sales associate to the watch section and you ask them, do you have any watch straps? This is my lug width, right? 20 millimeter for most Rolex. And they bring out a tray, which only has a dozen, sometimes half a dozen examples. You say, do you have anything more? You know, do you have more in stock, perhaps in the back, perhaps in some box somewhere, you know, stashed away somewhere around here? They will probably say yes and look around and bring an entire new selection. And even if you don't find it in those, if you have a particular leather, you know, material, pattern, etc., in mind, um, you can just tell them, and they will make it up for you, and not necessarily as custom. If it is something that you have seen somewhere that is in their provided dimensions, they will just produce it for you. It will take a while, perhaps. It will take some time. But anything and everything they have in women's bags, those same leathers they will have available for watch straps. So it's not too bad. Loser is harsh. Yeah, someone who doesn't understand the process. Thank you, Ossi, for mitigating the sting of that phrase. And again, I think I love you, Ossi. And it's because, first and foremost, because you speak the truth, right? And you do it in an unfiltered fashion. Hermes doesn't let me in the store more money for Rolex. They let everyone. It's just if it's your very first time, as you have just described in the Rolex, your Rolex experience, OC, they might judge you in a certain way and just not provide you easy access as they provide to some other people. But once you have a sales associate, you basically enter through the back door. Don't get any ideas. But yes, you basically enter through the back door when you have that special relationship. Jay says, I don't like the woman I've used in the past. She gives me the creeps. Honest question. Oh no, you can't find it on the website. You cannot find it on the website. All you can find on the website for Hermes in terms of watch straps is going to be for the Apple Watch, basically, and maybe extra straps for their own models. You have to go into the boutique and actually discuss the options. Yeah, we will have another perhaps episode about Hermes sales associates. I actually have a very distinguished older woman whom I really like as a person, as a human being. But of course, some of my best experiences with sales associates were in their original location in Paris. In Rue Faubourg de Saint-Honoré, where they have some of the most beautiful women who demonstrate how to fold an Hermes scarf in like 100 different ways, and you just have to say please. So Hermes does have very, very great sales associates, I have to say. Sometimes they can be quite snooty, but you have to speak to them in their own language, and I really don't mean French. You just have to find the frequency and reconnect at that level. Anyway, this can be a very long conversation, so maybe that deserves its other video. SD4000, yes, they have become very collectible, as with any limited production Rolex. I wish you had picked one up as well. I hardly buy any watch for pure investment purposes. I didn't really like the SD4000s, so I never even thought of picking them up. But I hope I will get the chance to get an SD43 at retail. Lord Sugar Mom. Hey, that was the Pontiff's suggestion, and I think I should take it. 4.9's fine. Yes, upvote, guys. I'm I'm signing off unless you have any last minute questions, or unless Tim Wright somehow jumps on, as he usually does, right before I close, and then we have a very long, engaging, and lovely discussion. So I'm posting the link for once more. Otherwise, I'm about to sign off. Once again, like, subscribe, and tell your friends. If you have a question regarding the history of a brand, the provenance of a particular model, if you want me to do a collection review for you, send the photos. If you want me to guide you through an upcoming purchase, send me your question at lordhellespontv@gmail.com. Again, this is the last day of my promotion because, again, I put a lot of work into the channel. And I'm generally grateful for you to help me and push me forward on the path of monetization. But I think after today, I will start charging a nominal amount for these videos. But here we are. You still have one day. So if you have any questions, just send them out to lordhellespontv@gmail.com, and we will talk more. All right. Look at that.
Lord, how are you?
Hey.
I just want to jump on real quick and let you know that your assessment of the SD43 is spot on, my friend, spot on.
Thank you. I feel you are getting some red writing on you as we speak. Is that?
It's the perfect pool watch. If you're ever poolside, the only watch you should be wearing is the SD43.
Beautiful.
Have a great day, Lord. Peace out.
You too, man. Thank you. You see, that's the man that's the Rolex man we all aspire to be, sitting under the shade of Tiffany blue umbrellas by the poolside, enjoying life with a red writing Seadweller on the wrist. Wonderful. Junior Johnson, welcome. Just watch the first half hour when you get the chance. It's not so bad. I know people usually don't replay live streams. And hey, I'm not Archie, I don't provide full-blown entertainment from beginning to end. But for this live stream, I would highly recommend, if you're interested in the topic, watch the first half hour. After that, we were much more casual, just answering random questions. So whenever you find time in your day, that will be the part to focus. Guys, love you all. Upvote, like, and subscribe. And if you have any questions, it's lordhellespontv@gmail.com. And if you're feeling generous and want to encourage me and want to help me buy some equipment to go out and film outside in Los Angeles, send me a donation at that same address through PayPal. Take care. I'll see you later today on the Pontiff stream for sure.